Well, hello there. This is Denise, and I'm once again in the Activated Asana podcast, where we talk about all kinds of issues pertaining to teaching yoga, pertaining to helping our students on their path of yoga and ultimately their healing journey. And I'm joined by Sara once again, who's a colleague of mine, also an Activated Asana teacher. And we're talking today for the third time about pain. And it's been interesting so far, Sara. I mean, this is a topic we could go on about forever, probably.
I'm glad. Thanks for having me on again for part 3 of 3 about pain. This topic is huge for sure.
Yeah. And we just really want to help yoga teachers understand it better. It's really all about reducing stress and fear of a yoga teacher who has students that are in pain from time to time. The student needs to also be able to reduce their fear. And if a yoga teacher understands a lot more about pain and what we can do about it and how we can influence it, then I think they're just going to be better equipped to help their students. And that's what it's all about for us. So we've already had 2 episodes. Hopefully you've heard those ones, but I'll just do a really speedy recap here. So we looked at how pain is an experience and that it's very subjective, person to person, not necessarily indicating an injury. Sometimes there is injury. Sometimes there's really not injury. Okay. And we talked about why that is. It's also very important information. So again, whether there's an injury or not, something is being communicated to us. So that is information that should be investigated. Pain is basically a request for change. I hope everybody remembers that. It's a very useful way to think about it. And that pain is actually in the brain. It's an evaluation that happens in the brain. I know it seems like it's in the tissue, but that is just chemistry and electricity that is a signal that your brain is interpreting as pain in this location. So just so you know, I think it's important to know again, because it's so subjective. And we talked about some of the factors that cause us to perceive pain a certain way or makes us more sensitive to pain. And that pain is often part of an inflammatory response, and that the inflammatory response is the healing response, guys. I know there's a war on inflammation going on. And yes, you don't want, kind of chronic inflammation going on in your joints, but that chronic inflammation, which would have an element of discomfort, is also a message. It's telling you, maybe it's saying, change your diet, change your outlook on life. It's asking for change. Okay. So your body is always trying to heal. Just understand that if you're having an inflammatory response and it doesn't seem like there's any reason for it, you should investigate that. Don't just take a pill, figure out what's going on. What's your body trying to tell you? All right. And then pain is an experience that's affected by a whole bunch of different factors. So, what's going on in your relationships? How well supported are you by others in your life? Are your relationships going well? Is your work-life balance good? Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well? What are your thoughts like, negative or positive? So many, many factors playing into whether or not you're going to be pain sensitive or not. And I mentioned many times in the last couple of podcasts that, hey, we're comfortable with that because we're yoga teachers. We know how important the mental, emotional, spiritual life is to what we experience in our body. We realize that there's a very strong connection there and one affects the other. So we don't have any problem going there. All right. So Sara, what can we as yoga teachers do? Like, what are some of the things that, are tools of our trade, if you will, tools of teaching yoga, and even like who we are as people? How can we help our students?
Great question. I think that yoga teachers have a really unique opportunity, apart from like a fitness instructor or other kind of realms of activity, because we have the chance to slow things down. And we're helpers. We want to help too, right? We might not be able to fix it, but we can certainly do things to help reduce the fear. We can listen right? Take the time before class, after class. I'm sure people are getting there a little bit early and want to chat, or maybe not. But if you're there, then you can have that opportunity to listen and support the students, right? So on all of the levels. So you're already there supporting them just by offering a physical class that they can come to, right? Or if you're doing it online, a class that they can follow. But also just being there in person and educating them with information and asking them to be curious about their movements and about the feelings, the interoception, right? So it's not just the physical, like you were saying, which I totally agree. It's all the parts, which I think yoga has a beautiful reach into, right? All of those little parts. While you're in the class or while you're teaching the class, you can definitely have the opportunity to modify. So if you notice that, if you're looking at the class and you're noticing struggles, or if you're noticing somebody has the wincing pain face, you can definitely modify. And then you can also encourage their participation, right? If they're hesitant and you already know that they've been working through an injury, and they're getting that communication from their body, you can encourage the healthy relationship, I feel like, with that. And in that, I think we can also take the strategic approach, because we know about progressive overload, we know about the FIT principle, right? So that knowledge that you already have can be applied to pain, right? Or applied to those modifications and encouragement and everything else that I just mentioned. So I think the other thing that we can do for our students, with our students, is ask them questions. And I know that's what we're going to chat about next is dealing with student concerns in the actual activated asana class, and how we do that.
Yeah, because, the pain is it's a piece of information, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We, like in activated asana, our teachers understand, like, there is a story and the story needs to be told. Again, I feel like that the storytelling aspect of somebody's pain experience is key to understanding them as a person and how you can support them. So, we kind of provide a sort of a strategy, I guess, for how we would approach asking questions, so that we're asking relevant questions. We're not prying, we're there to hear anything our student wants to say, but there are certain questions that are going to help us more than others in terms of us helping, the student solve something. And yeah, even though we're very focused on helping them solve these issues or fix problems, it's not like sometimes the problem's going to fix itself if we create the correct conditions. So that's kind of where we are. Okay, we'll just keep that in mind. So, your student, and I mean any student. So, your student could be just showing up in your class. They've been away for a long time. Like, say it's September and they've been gone from their practice all summer, right? They could be totally new to asana, never practiced before. They might be returning after surgery or after an injury. They may be very experienced and very independent too. And some people want you to let them what to do every single moment, so you're dealing with the full gamut of students. But I can tell you that any and all of those students are probably going to have a pain issue at some point. Something is going to ask for their attention. And you as a yoga teacher will probably get asked about it. So, you might as well be ready for those times. And I would say, like, for me, in fact, I look forward to times when my students come up to me after class and ask a question. I mean, I don't shy away from that at all. I'm just like, okay, let's see what's going on here, and, I always see that as progress, to be honest. When your student is kind of learning something new, discomfort comes up for them, and then you get them to move through that discomfort, and then, something else is uncomfortable now. Well, now I feel that is just a process of the body sorting itself out and regaining balance over time. What do you think of that, Sarah?
For sure. And it's not like we say fix the problem and we use the quotation marks, because it's really not our problem to fix, but
Exactly.
rather to support, right? So they're experiencing that for a reason. And if we can be a sounding board for that, I think that's that's an appropriate scope for yoga teachers for sure.
Oh, 100%. Like if just giving them an opportunity to say it out loud to somebody else can really help them understand what's going on with themselves too.
100%, because we might say it in a different way, you know, that that reflective way of talking, you know, maybe you say it in a different way than I said it, maybe it'll click in my brain a little bit differently and go, oh, that little light bulb moment just went on, and oh, well, that totally makes sense that I've been sleeping not very well for the past week and now this hurts again. Oh, of course, why didn't I think of that, right?
Exactly.
So I think one of the most important things that when you're having that discussion with a student and they are like complaining about the pain is to just encourage them and educate them that your body is always trying to do the best for you, whatever that is, whether that's sitting on the couch, getting used to that, right? And again, we talked about stimulus and the side effects and all that kind of stuff. So if we can encourage the student to think positively about that, I think that's one thing over and over, that it's information, that it's stimulus, and your body is trying to heal.
And healing can be uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's an adaptation. Just like if we were training for something, that adaptation is going to, again, send chemicals to the brain and activate something, right? It's, people don't get ripped for like the, right? If we want to go into definition.
I love that word.
No, but it's really like, if you think every time you work out the muscle, it is tearing a little, and that's how people get ripped, is because it's ripping a little and then healing, and then ripping a little and then healing, and that's adaptation. So if we're growing in some way, that's going to happen in lots of areas of our life to activate and to rebuild the tissue, right? I think the other thing that we can try and help in our students is just that trust and confidence in their own body and in their own body's wisdom, right? Like, trust that the body is trying to do its best for you, even if it doesn't seem like that, right? Like, it's getting you to limp on that ankle for a reason. It's trying to tell you, and it's probably tried to tell you something before, and now it's modifying your walking gait so that you can still continue to walk, and just in a different way. And
yeah, you're just working around it.
You're just working around it, right? But again, that's, I think, a prime example of your body is just trying to do its best for you. So you still want to walk? No problem, Sarah, I got you. Here we go with the compensation to limp you along, right? And with that in mind, I think there's some basic rules that we can go over for some extra questions to ask, but questions with a purpose. Because I think you had a really good point that I don't need all the details of your stressful life. Like, if you want to share that with me, I will keep that in my own confidence, but I don't need to know. I don't need to know all the details to be able to help somebody. So I think there's some good guidelines that we're going to cover that, basically.
Yeah. And, like often, like, somebody who is experiencing pain isn't very clear themselves about the kind of information that would be helpful to you. So, it's good for you to just say, okay, let's talk about a few questions. I have a few questions for you. And that'll probably be very relieving for them, because they know it's not up to them to, give you all the relevant information. You're going to ask for what you need. And so let's give a little bit of guidance around that. Okay, so number one, we have some basic rules. In activated asana, we talk about organization and activation. These are with 3 activations: hand to core, foot to core, full body activation. These apply to everybody. Okay, so that's a basic rule. If you have been teaching this methodology to your student and they still come up to you and say, oh, this is uncomfortable or whatever, I think the number one thing to do is make sure they are applying those activations properly. Because people can, I've been a movement teacher for a really long time, and not everybody has like kinesthetic literacy. They just are are not sort of natural movers. They don't have a lot of movement experience, perhaps. And it's a little more difficult for them to translate cues into what they feel in their own body. So we're always going to check and make sure that they're using those activations properly. They're not turning them on more than they need to, and that they understand those mechanisms. Because what those activations are kind of meant to do is to develop better movement habits. So that's what we talk about when we say skillful movement. If you're trying to develop a way of moving that is more skillful, more efficient, better for your joints, etc., we have a methodology for that. And ultimately, what's going to result from that, hopefully, is that you're going to sub out some of your old habits that maybe weren't as functional for better habits. Yeah. Okay. So, and I know, again, from lots of experience with this, changing old habits and old patterns, we talk about samskaras in yoga, that are more on the mental level. Ways of thinking, ruts in the road, in terms of you always think the same thoughts, kind of in a loop kind of thing. Our body has similar things. It has these habituated patterns that may not be all that efficient, and they may be actually harming your body over time. And changing from those old habits to a new and better habit, that could be uncomfortable too,
I think you had a really good, I'm pretty sure it was you who had that analogy of beating a path through the jungle. Was that you? You should tell them that, because that's along the same kind of lines too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be quick about it. Yeah, because I could go into this forever, but your movement habits and patterns, and again, this is not relegated to movement. Really, it's also thought.
Yeah,
but in terms of the body, there are real, like, physical results from our movements that we do all the time. So this is an important thing, because I do get a lot of questions from yoga teachers around, well, is it okay to do this or that, or this shape or that shape, or put the knee over the ankle? Is it okay to do that? And I would say, yeah, it's okay to do that. Just don't do it all the time, all day long, every single day. It's fine. Like, all these positions we can go into are fine. But there are certain patterns that we do all the time. Those are the ones that matter. Yes. Okay. If you have good patterns, you're going to build a strong body. If you have wonky patterns all the time and use those all the time, that is also going to build your body, and probably not in a way that you really want. It's going to potentially lead to injury proneness, falls, and just all kinds of injuries that just seem to come out of nowhere. Sure. Yeah. But so what you're trying to do is, with your movement habits, and again, conscious ones, you start a new habit. Say you're starting to, what we would say, beat a path. So imagine like a path in the jungle. First time you go into that jungle, you have to use a machete. You have to cut a path for yourself in there. But if you just go through there one time, the jungle's just going to take over after you. It doesn't matter how nice and clean you cut it for yourself to walk through. The jungle's going to take it over, unless you keep walking through that path. If you keep walking through that path, you're going to beat down the path. You're going to make sure the foliage doesn't grow back. And so that's when you start to establish a pattern that you're starting to habituate. When you're cutting a path through the jungle, you're mainly affecting the nervous system. So there's not a lot of big changes happening on the physical level. But once you move into that second stage, where you're beating the path and you're keeping the path clean, now you're working into the muscular path. So, nervous system is a quick learner, but you need to repeat the path to make sure you're establishing a solid movement habit, which is, it's kind of a brain muscle connection through the nerves. Sure. You go on to the next part, you're building muscle now. Okay. So as you beat the path and keep the path clear, the more you go through there over and over again over time. So that's what a habit would be. You are establishing a change in your tissue. And that would include like muscle, connective tissue, joints, bones. Everything is going to start to respond to that thing you do all the time. Okay. And then, over time, you're going to have a paved road through the jungle. And that is at the level where you've done it so often, you're no longer thinking about it. It's the way you move. This is how I move my body. Your connective tissue will have adapted at that point. And that means, again, if you're practicing really good mechanics at your knee, again, this is the whole reason for organizing and activating, getting your joints in better positions, getting into more stable, dynamically stable positions, reinforcing that pattern so that it's affecting your connective tissue over time. So your knee tracks properly and your patella is nice and healthy and your ankles are centrated and you still have a foot arch maybe, So all of these connective tissues adapt over time.
I love that analogy because it kind of, and you can tell that analogy to students too. It just creates, in my mind, it creates just a story because again, you're going to have a bunch of different learners that you're talking to. You're alluding to kinesthetics. Some are going to be audio. Some are going to be visual. So I really like that story because then you can link it to carpal tunnel and thoracic outlet syndrome and like a few others, right? So I really like that analogy of the beating the path. Thank you for that.
Well, the whole point in our education of talking about that story is so that teachers can tell their students about that there's a timeline involved.
Yeah, that too.
Because, when you're trying to either develop something, say better balance, or you want to get stronger, or you want more range of motion, you have to understand that it's a process. You're changing tissues and joints and bones, like you are changing things. It takes time. And, people need to understand that timeline so they can be a little more patient with themselves and they can be consistent and sort of stick with it as long as they need to get the changes happening that they want. And I think this is a big thing in rehab because people they'll stick to something for 3 weeks while they're going through rehab. And then they just go away. As soon as they don't have pain, or less pain, they think they're done. But it's like, no, you haven't finished the building process. You've got to beat the path and pave the road.
That's
and
right.
I do think, like if people understood that, it would help. It would help them be patient and stay with it. And that's the path of yoga too. It's like, it's called a practice. And I love that about it. It's like, yes, you keep practicing. It is a practice. You're never done. You keep going back to practice. You have to keep practicing, because there are changes happening. You are evolving, as a human. So yeah, it's a process, takes time, worth it totally. So, changing old habits for new habits, yeah, you're going to have to beat a new path. You're going to have to pave that road. So it does take time, and just sticking with it while you're going through those uncomfortable changes sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just how it is. So that's sort of why you're asking some of those questions. You want to, look at, make sure they are adopting good patterns.
Yeah.
There's no point in like trying to help them with an issue that is being caused by their arch, their ankle and their knee collapsing without changing that movement pattern. So you got to give them a better pattern. And that's why we say organize and activate, ground into your foot, dial the knee out, so that you are in a better pattern and you start practicing the better pattern. Often that takes care of the pain.
Yeah. And I think once you're in a better pattern, I think that's going to have an effect on your pain, right?
Oh, it will. Yeah, because you're changing the pathway of the tension forces through the tissue.
Exactly. So it's going to calm things down a bit.
Usually does. Unless it's like not in the tissue at all, but we'll talk about that in a bit. All right. So you also want to find out, like, you need to notice, like, if somebody says their knee is bothering them, well, look at their knee. Is it like red and swollen? It's not the right time, like, to try to like make big changes or give them a challenge or anything. The best you can do there is like, is it comfortable to move if we put you in a different position? But if somebody like just sprained their knee or had a bad fall or whatever, you should just leave it alone for a few days, just rest it out. If they show up in yoga class, I would modify almost the entire class for them, so they were stimulating the body just very gently, just a little bit, do some good breathing and kind of supported postures and stuff like that. So they are letting the body do its healing. And if we're stressing the body out too much, it's going to interrupt that. So you want to make sure that they're taking the time that they need to rest. And I think it was, the second podcast we did, we said, you need to sometimes give your students permission to rest, because maybe they won't give it to themselves. And, you can help them, that is a help for them to know that.
Absolutely.
If you're working with a chronic issue, right? So we'll often have, this is where people start calling their body parts bad, right? Well, I've always had a bad back, or I have bad knees. I wish I had a dime for every time I heard somebody say, well, everyone in my family has bad knees, so I have bad knees. Or everybody needs to have hip replacements in my family, so it's just a matter of time. Like, I just do not buy into that stuff. I feel like we are, sure, we might have certain bony morphology and a certain build and a certain type of tissue, but we can always interact with that. We can always choose to practice in ways that are better for our body. So, that's why we need to get to know our body. So if somebody has, like, again, I'm drifting now into what they believe about what's going on in their body, but this has a lot to do with what they experience as pain, or as a chronic pain or a problem for them. So, if you're working with something like that, then I would really have them learn and make sure they're practicing and can do it comfortably, organization and activation. I just really feel like that is their best shot at moving past that chronic issue and eventually strengthening the tissue in a better pathway that would, support the healing and still give it some load. Because, a lot of, say, if you go to a general practitioner doctor, they might say, oh, you just need to rest that. And not realizing like that person already has a very sedentary lifestyle. Maybe the only activity they have is going to yoga. And now the doctor's taking that away from them. But you, as a yoga teacher, you could probably find lots of things for them to do that would support the general health of their body, but just modify for whatever, more acute or more painful chronic issue, or whatever that might be, whatever the problem is for them. Because movement, yoga, breathing, also being there for your encouragement so you can encourage them, that is all going to help with the healing process. It's actually a very, very important aspect of it. So we do need to load the tissue, but we want to stay within their pain tolerance range, and we can just modify around that. Also, people, like, not every person's the same, right? So we can't talk as though like all tissues need this certain thing. We can say, yes, all tissues need loading. But again, you have some people who are like very sensitive, and then other people who are like, right, we have the full gamut, right? We have people who they get injured and they're just going to push past it. They're just going to ignore that and they're just going to go for it anyway. And then you have people who, the smallest thing will really like take the wind out of their sails, and they just feel so vulnerable and fearful because of that. So, knowing ourselves on a physical level that the body does need loading, it does need movement as much as possible. Just keep that in mind. One of the things we can always do that usually assists with the healing process and can actually reduce pain is isometric contraction. So that
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, I was getting around to it because I've become, like, again, over years of fitness training, all kinds of group training, and then personal training, and then massage therapy and orthopedic testing. I have really become a big fan of long-held isometric contraction. I know there's something very potent in there. It's always been part of remedial exercise protocol, but they're usually talking like 4 or 5 breaths or something like that. When we're talking long-held isometric, now we're talking a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. those kinds of contractions are so incredibly strengthening for muscles and connective tissues, which are going to support the joints and let the joint heal very effectively without moving it around a whole lot. Because oftentimes, like if you actually do have an injury in the tissue and there are like fibers broken or structures broken, movement isn't going to be good for a little while. So you need to keep neuromuscular connection happening. You need to keep those tissues strong and rebuilding themselves. You can do it without movement. So this means when your muscles are working, but there's no movement happening. And you guys know exactly what I'm talking about if I say, chair pose. Right? Your muscles are working really hard, but there's no movement happening. Single leg standing balancing or warrior poses or anything like that when we're holding. So we already do a lot of isometric contraction in yoga. We're just saying, like, if you're working with an injury, you can put a student in a very neutral position. So there's not a lot of, joint extension or flexion. Very, very neutral, sustainable, but stay there for a long time. And, that has an analgesic effect, which means it reduces pain sensitivity. And you know what? I think largely it's like reestablishing the brain and the muscle, like making up, right? Like they were mad at each other and the brain didn't want the muscle to move and the muscle was angry because of how it felt and how the brain was evaluating the situation. But this helps them get along together and work together throughout that healing process. And it's magical. It's really wonderful.
Because we don't want the brain will kind of say an ankle sprain, right? We used to get this a lot. This was the bread and butter at the clinic, at the Army clinic, right? Ankle sprains. So much. And that's exactly what we did. We did isometrics, depending on how acute it was or how bad it was. Even in an unloaded position, we would have them like in a dorsiflexed, and because they had already had the screening from the doctor and x-rays if they needed or whatever. And an isometric unloaded, just pushing their foot against the wall, or if they could stand, we would have them do an isometric standing as well, to again connect the brain to the body for that exact reason, because the brain will forget about that part that's hurt because it doesn't want to feel that pain.
Yeah. And it's so important, and it restores confidence.
Yeah.
And that's what the nervous system wants. It's like, I need to know that I've got all the information I need to conduct this human being through their life safely. Your nervous system is very preoccupied with your safety. Yes. And keeping you alive. So, you gotta be nice to the nervous system. It really has your best interest at heart, but sometimes it gets overprotective, and this helps to reduce some of that. Yeah, and like reduce fear. So those are some of the first way of thinking about it. These are the basic rules. So organize and activate. Find out, is there something swelling? Are they bleeding right now? Like, is this acute or is this a chronic issue for them? Because, your approach is going to be different, but ultimately we're working on developing better habits through our methodology. Make sure they stay in their pain tolerance range. So, just modify, but do some loading. And just think about the isometric contractions that you already know that you could use, though that's a way of modifying, right? It's a way of modifying. You don't have to go to end ranges or anything like avoid stretching with an injury, but an isometric contraction is going to be very effective. Just even something as simple as standing on one leg with the other leg out ahead of you a little bit. Stay there for a long while. If you have a foot, ankle, knee, or hip injury, it's going to be amazing. And we'll probably do a show on isometrics one of these days, Sarah. We better do that. Hey,
sounds good. So I think that brings us to we can ask, like, what positions provoke the pain, provoke the apprehension, the instability, the achiness, the fear, right? What, like you were just talking about the central nervous system, like you're going to know if your central nervous system doesn't want to do it, because you're going to be like, oh, you're going to have that quick breath, or you're going to be really hesitant to do that. And then we also want to ask, what makes it feel better? So we want to ask those questions because we want to know the answers to those questions, right? We're going to want to know what that's going to tell us and what the student is going to tell us so that we can move forward with that. So we're going to, again, want to make sure their pain tolerance to help them work within it. Always work in the stable positions first. Like we can think about the progressions even as children, right? Prone, supine, quadruped, half kneeling, tall kneeling, standing, all of those positions, walking, moving, those are all different positions that we can kind of move through as progressions. And even in those positions, we can watch and ask our students that same question. How does this feel? Does it feel achy, sharp? Or does this make it feel better, worse? Like, and we want to know. That's going to give us some clues.
Yeah, if I may, like a lot of times, like when people have a pain issue, they stop moving.
Yes.
Or they move as little as possible. And then they lose touch with, well, can I actually do this over here? And oh, that actually feels fine. You know, they're just afraid to try sometimes. So just giving them permission to try, right? Just like, well, let's see how this is. Let's see how that works, you know, and just kind of giving them some permission so they can kind of discover their own boundaries, right? They need to like discover their pain-free zone.
And I think that's aligning again what at the start what we said about the curiosity. That's the curiosity. Let's get them start moving and then be curious again, right? And then let's try something else and be curious again. And if the answer is, "Ooh, no, can't do that," all right, well, let's try it again tomorrow or the next practice and see how it goes then, because it's not just a one and done thing. It can evolve. Again, back to your path analogy, it's not just one time that we're going to try this and you're done and that's it and it's like this forever. It's going to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing that we can ask, is it a new issue or have you had this before or is it a surgery? Because that's going to make a difference. I think also I've seen that make a difference for people and in myself. Like if it's brand new, the fear is going to maybe be, oh God, no, this is terrible. It's a brand new thing and the body and the brain is just overthinking this. If it's an old injury, you might have the opposite, like, let's just power through. It'll go away. It's fine. I've been here before kind of thing. And if it's surgery, that can be a whole other can of worms over there. And I think we can use those things to help calm it down as well, those strategies.
You mean organization and activation?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure, because like, again, the nervous system likes and muscles like to take action. They like to feel like they have something to do that they can do. That is very calming for the nervous system. Like anytime you're in the question of anything, like not knowing is one of the most fearful experiences for a human. So the more, you know, they can learn about their parameters and what feels good and what they need to avoid, the better they're going to feel, the better the nervous system is going to calm down.
And we can do the organization activation. I feel like it's an overarching principle. Like you can do that even with replaced joints or if they've had surgery, the rules still apply.
Yeah, because we all have the same fascial lines.
That's right.
Regardless of whether a joint's been replaced. And I have had so much feedback from people who have had their joints replaced, hips and knees in particular. And they're so thrilled with how much more movement confidence using organization and activation has given them, because they feel like they have regained control of their body. Where, you know, because going through something as extreme as one of those surgeries, it can really disconnect you from your body. And so that, yeah, organization and activation can really reconnect you. So yeah.
Absolutely. Just that proprioception, that interoception, especially after surgery where things have actually been like cut. Yeah. That's going to be really important to reestablish that brain body connection.
Yeah. All right. So another question we want to ask is, are you seeing a doctor? This is kind of a loaded question. Are you seeing a doctor or maybe a physical therapist about this issue? So your student comes up to you after class, they ask you about their knee, their hip. Are they seeing a doctor? That's a good question to ask, because you don't want to inadvertently sort of tread on anybody's toes, cut anybody's grass, because quite frankly, if a student is seeing a doctor or a chiro or a physio, it depends. Like there's many schools of thought out there, but it's quite likely that one of those practitioners would have given them a diagnosis. And, I'll just quickly say that, I come from the massage therapy world where I was actually the director of a college and I was interacting with the professional associations and cross-country groups that were working on national accreditation and stuff like that. And all these people wanted massage therapists to be able to diagnose because they did not have that, that was not in their scope of practice. So it's in the scope of practice of somebody who's a doctor, right? But massage therapists could not diagnose. And I just remember being appalled at this drive to get massage therapists to be able to make diagnoses, because most good massage therapists know that the power of a diagnosis it's a very almost a sinister power in a way, because when a doctor gives a patient diagnosis, I know some people would say that it sort of validates the patient's concern. But what I've seen happen all too often is that the patient takes that on as part of their identity, and then it makes it much harder for the body to heal that issue. So I feel it's more, as a yoga teacher, we don't diagnose, okay? And we shouldn't want to either. Let's just talk to our student, hear their story, let them tell us what happened to them, and we'll just look at what's happening in their body right then and there. Does this feel good? Tell me where it hurts. Show me what positions bother it. Let's just look at what's actually happening in their body and not get caught up in trying to figure out, is this thoracic outlet syndrome, or do you have rotator cuff tendonitis? Or, let's not go there. Okay.
I think what the diagnosis can be helpful with is, and the patient can tell you this as well, is with the diagnosis, then what were the parameters? And then that can be within our scope, right? Because then if we know that the professional who gave the diagnosis wanted the patient or wanted the client or whatever participant to stay in neutral spine, we know what neutral spine is. Great. You don't want to do flexion extension for a couple weeks? Great. We can modify with that and then add that in as spice later when you're not so acute or when it's calmed down and all that.
And that is the useful part of a student seeing a practitioner, is like, what are the parameters? Because maybe there's been an X-ray or MRI or whatever, and that practitioner has access to that information and they can set up some parameters for that student. That's what we need to know. But I think it's always important to help the student let go of being identified with the diagnosis, or just even saying something, okay, so you've got rotator cuff tendonitis. It's fine. Your body's designed to heal. This can heal. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like that's important for them to know, so that they don't buy into a diagnosis and kind of take it with them through their life as though it's part of who they are all of a sudden. And then I would say, so if you hear that, okay, they have had a diagnosis, they do have some limitations and whatnot. We don't want to contradict anything. Boy, I got to tell you, I've heard some really interesting things that students have been told by other practitioners. And I feel like it hasn't done them any good. It's put them way deeper into the fear. And, I think one of the best things that we can do for them, again, is just reassure them that the body is designed to heal, even their body, and that we're going to work on stability first. We're going to modify positions. We're going to, there's things that we can do to get you into a place that feels better. And that is really going to be with working on stability first, which is what we recommend. And then, the other thing that would be really useful information too, you might know the student really well and you might not need to ask this question, but if you don't know the student well, then you need to know, like, what's their current level of activity? Is this somebody who's really, really active? Because it's quite funny. I'm sure you remember the story, Sarah, where a student we were talking to was saying that they have carpal tunnel from doing chaturanga.
Oh, yeah.
And then we find out that they knit as a hobby, and they're doing tons and tons of keyboarding and typing because of course that they're taking for hours and hours, and that they've had carpal tunnel before because of their clerical work. So obviously the source of the problem was not chaturanga. Maybe they were challenging those tissues in chaturanga too, but they have all this other repetitive stress going on. That is definitely part of the equation. So it's good to hear about the other activities that your student does, because that's definitely going to be a big part of the picture. They don't spend their whole life in yoga classes. So.
Yeah, no. And if I remember this correctly, once you coached her on like organization activation, didn't that like really relieve some of that tension? Because again, I think you said it just in a different way. And she was like, oh, that's of course. And it was like, I could see the little light bulb going on in her head, and just that connection to it. And I think she was able to organize and activate in an appropriate way. I think she was doing it too hard. And so I think she modified that.
I think what it was she wasn't using the full hand. She wasn't using the pads of her fingers. She was just kind of sitting on the heel of the hand. And yeah, so there was like a piece that she wasn't getting. So that's kind of like, remember the basic rules, just make sure that your student understands how to actually activate their hands, because if they're not using organization and activation properly, then they're not going to get the result that we would expect. So so that's just know, like, does this student have an active life? Are they sitting a lot? What's going on in their life? Because in order for you to recommend certain things, then you kind of need to know, what they have time for, what they already do, what's going to be a reasonable thing. Because again, you don't want to give them modifications or extra things to do if there's just no way that they'd be able to do it. So
that's right.
that can really show you where you can go in the practice. Just a couple more things here that we want to say. Always letting people know they have to heal, and there is a timeline involved, right? Letting people know, like, okay, you need to give this to calm down would probably take a few weeks, say with something like carpal tunnel. To start the rebuilding process, you'll be in the rebuilding process for months and months and months. Okay, it's not going to happen overnight. So, letting people know that they're going to need to go through a process. Like, so many people want to do things short term and get big gains, and if they don't get that, they're really discontent.
I think whereas because people don't know, they just don't know.
I guess they don't know. That's right. And the thing is, like, what we're kind of all about here is adopting habits, developing good habits that serve you for the rest of your life. It's not just to get over a problem. Then you can go back to doing the crazy things you were doing before. We want to develop something that's more sustainable than that, and that is going to give you a good long-term outcome as well. All right, so that's kind of, I did want to just bring up, just because I'm very interested in this myself, that people, just need to know that things can be going on in their body. Like we were talking about the last couple of podcasts, we're so affected by other factors, right? Mental, emotional, psychological, social factors. Sometimes people can get really hard on themselves if they have a chronic issue, especially. So usually if somebody has an acute issue, they don't get down on themselves. But if they have a chronic issue, because it goes on for such a long period of time, people can get really down on themselves for that. and they would like devalue themselves because of that. And
Well,
that's where you get people saying, oh, I have bad knees, I have bad this. And then they have this inevitable mindset that this is just how it's going to be. So again, I would just be on the lookout for that as a yoga teacher. And that's why, the message that we keep coming back to is so important, to just really keep emphasizing that the body is developed, is going to heal. That's how we're designed, and we just need to help it along. So
absolutely, especially if it's chronic, people can really start, you're going to know if someone really starts identifying it as part of themselves or owning it when they're describing things like, oh, my bad knees, or my bad shoulder, like that type of language. Really, to me, when I hear that, I'm like, oh, this person really is like, it's either been going, they're tired, they're really identifying with it. And I think if we just kind of give that support of, hey, look, that's your shoulder telling you something. It sounds like it's been telling you something for a long time, and it's just the knock is getting louder, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at some things that we can do to help, to see what we can communicate back to that shoulder or that injury or that wrist, and help them kind of separate themselves, their identity, from the injury or from the communication that's happening.
And I mean, I'm sure you've met people like this. I know I have. Like, why would you say some people choose not to heal? Is that a thing?
Oh, I think so. Sometimes I think injuries can manifest or stick around longer because that person needs something else, right? We were talking about all the other factors. So sometimes, yeah, man, your knee can totally be in pain. It can hurt. But you know what? Maybe having that chat while you're working on it, just that personal connection with someone, talking about and then you're discovering that person's job isn't going very well, or their relationship with a friend isn't going very well. That can definitely affect the knee pain. And by the time you're done working isometrics on the knee, as well as chatting with that person about just other things not related, they feel better. Am I a counselor? Absolutely not. 100% no. But did I just help that person a little bit by listening and working on their isometrics for their knee problem? Yeah, I did.
Yeah. And them just feeling like, okay, I can do something. We are quite action oriented in that way. One other thing that I know we kind of want to wrap up pretty soon, but I think is really worth talking about quickly, is that how common it is for yoga teachers to have chronic issues and like not want to talk about it. Like they don't want to let anybody know that they have chronic SI joint issues or knee issues or whatever, because a lot of yoga teachers feel like everything should be peachy keen. They should be like in perfect working order at all times. And if they're not, they're bad yogis, So I think this is a real thing and
that's a little bit of shame, right? That's a little bit of,
yes,
I'm not good enough, all that kind of stuff. That's where I think it's also, like, I know you created a community, right, of yoga teachers. I think that's really important to have a community of like-minded people who are all doing the same job, right? And I think those concerns are definitely valid. Just because you're a movement teacher, movement instructor, you yourself might need some of those supports, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we expect to be able to support everybody else if we feel unsupported or we have no one to go to, for support? I mean, we're holding ourselves out there as role models and as available to our students, right? And who's available to us? Well, I hope everybody has somebody in their life that they can go to and talk about these things and possibly work through them. But I think that's very important for yoga teachers. It's why we started our free community, which we're not going to talk about today, but that's why it exists, so yoga teachers have a place to go to talk and share. So, just understanding, I think we'll just sort of wrap up now this discussion of pain. And it's many different facets and whatnot. I think, just understanding that it's so subjective, and it's not really up to you to fix it or to figure it out even, but just seeing your student as a whole person with all these other factors that are playing into what they're experiencing right now, just being there for them, listening, and constantly giving our students messages about how the body's designed to heal, how your body's doing its best for you, how we need to just attend to the needs of the body in a realistic way and appreciate everything that the body does for us and everything the body experiences for us. I mean, it's digesting our experience, and, that takes a toll on the body sometimes. Even if you are a good mover, even if you do take good care of yourself, sometimes because of these other factors, you're going to have pain somewhere, or you're going to sustain an injury somewhere. It's okay. Your body will heal.
Absolutely. And I think another important thing is just stay in your scope. We are movement teachers, yoga teachers, we are a diverse group. So if your training has a special element to it that yoga teachers have a scope, right? So, and all of us have different expertise. Your background is different than my background. So I think as long as we're staying within our scope and having other sources to refer people out to or have another chat with for outside communication, I think that's important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Everybody can heal. We're here to help. And I hope this gives yoga teachers a little more understanding of how to approach this touchy topic sometimes with their students and even with themselves. Maybe we've done a little bit of self-care for yoga teachers here too. So thank you so much for joining me, Sara. And I'm sure we'll be doing many more conversations. But tell us what you're up to right now. Like, is there a place that you're, posting information and stuff, or where can people see where your classes are, et cetera?
Oh, thanks, Denise. Yeah, so people can check out my Facebook, I have Instagram as well. Cross Training with Sara, all one word, is my website. So crosstrainingwithsara.ca. I'm also on Facebook as Cross Training with Sara, and I have a YouTube, but yeah, you can check me out there as well. Thanks, Denise, for having me on again.
Okay, of course, always a pleasure, Sara. All right, so thanks for joining us, you guys, and hopefully we'll catch you on another podcast. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.
Hi there, Denise here. I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can see the next one. And hey, if you're interested in learning more about what I do, I invite you to my free community called the Yoga Teachers Lounge. You can join that in the link below. And hey, if you want to work more closely with me and become an activated Asana teacher, then head over to my website and fill out an application. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you on the next video. Bye for now, everyone.